Hello, everybody, and welcome to Teachers in the Dungeon. I'm Tom Gross, one half of this podcast. Sitting across from me here in the dungeon is my co-partner, co-host, Dan Ream.
Hello, everybody.
Well, hello indeed. So we thought it'd be interesting and good to talk about building a memorable NPC.
Yes.
Because an NPC can change the dynamics of the game in many ways, and we're going to talk about some of those ways here.
And it is obviously known across the game that that's the case. I don't know how many Boblin the Goblin memes there are out there of, and of course the joke is there's a throwaway NPC that immediately gets adopted and
right.
So this is sort of our take on what we think are the most memorable ways or the best ways to create a memorable NPC, but of course there are lots of people out there, lots of opinions on it.
And if you've been playing as long as, I suppose I have, since the 1980s, NPCs back in the day, and maybe someone can correct me on this, but this was my experience, NPCs back in the day were really there to just support the group in fighting.
Yeah.
And so I might have a spare fighter that just is assumed to be with the group, and sometimes that fighter would be the one that goes in first. Mm-hmm. Because, if there's arrows waiting or a trap that they couldn't detect, then the NPC would be the shield. And so that was really from early on, that was my experience with NPCs. So when 5th edition rolled around and I came back to Dungeons and Dragons, it was a cool dynamic, but sometimes it was hard for me to remember that, this person should have a personality and a connection. And so some of these tips are not new to me, but new to me in the last 8 years or so.
And it really enriches the game. I think it's a key element of the emotional connection that you see.
Well, and I think we'll talk about this, but NPCs are more than just the people traveling with the campaign, which is where my mindset had always been, is that it's a non-player character, so they have to be going with the group. Mm-hmm. NPCs can be all over. They can be the common people in the city. If the players interact with them, they have become an NPC.
Yeah.
So I have 5 tips. Is that what you have?
I do.
Okay.
And we did sort of touch base a little bit beforehand, and we came up with the topic and then went our separate ways to think it out.
We did.
And came back with some very different, we went very different directions with it in a certain way as far as how to design. So.
Yeah, when you were describing yours to me, I thought, well, let's just have you do this show because I really like the angle at which you took. And so I think yours, you go really specific with yours, and mine are a bit more general. So I think I'll go first because then you may find a way to sort of bring yours in alongside mine. So my first one is with an NPC, and I think this works for everything from the store shop owner clear to someone who's going to have a major impact on the game, and that is determine the motivation of the NPC. Know what your NPC believes in. So the store owner, in most cases, I don't know, again, this is stereotyping what this NPC might be, but they want to make money. They're in business to make money. And so, but maybe you'll come across the store owner that is more in the business of, they need to make money and stay sustainable, but they like to help adventurers. And so maybe they're an information gatherer or something like that. But know what your NPCs are, but also let them be dynamic. They can change sides on something if you or if your players have been persuasive. Mm-hmm. So they might have been fighting for, let's say, the Zentarum if you're in Waterdeep. And throughout gameplay, if your players have really latched onto this person, they could persuade them maybe to drop the ways of the Zentarum and maybe go with the Harpers or at least get them to leave the Zentarum. And so have them strong in their beliefs, but also be flexible in that if the players are really doing some good role play, that the NPC can make changes. I think that's important.
I think you do that really well. There's several, this is a little bit tangential, but it's in the ballpark of what you were saying. But you've been really good about allowing us as players to pull NPCs into our orbit, so to speak. Ones that I think you intended to just be one and done.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, we latch on to them.
You guys are so
drag us along.
Yeah, you guys are so good about that. And you guys, and I go back to our show last week. where we talked about ways to ruin your player's day, and one of those was to railroad. But you guys are so good and creative about the way in which you interact with the NPCs, especially in the Waterdeep campaign. And I guess that's something we could talk about here, is that I feel like NPCs in a city campaign, which the Waterdeep campaign is a new experience for me because I've never run cities before. The amount of people that you run into is so colossally large,
right,
that you guys have been so good at like, well, let me try this angle with them, and let's try this angle with them, and I mean we've talked about this on the show before also, that this is the game where we've had just role play sessions,
yes,
where hardly any dice other than maybe persuasion or insight or something have been rolled, and so yeah, that's one of the things that I found and discovered in that, is that I need to know what these NPCs believe in, because if I don't, they'll kind of go with whatever you say.
Right. Yeah, that's a lot of prep on your end, and to keep those characters straight.
Yeah, and so sometimes I do go the stereotype where, okay, I didn't think you guys would really want to talk to the person who sells potions as much, and so I have to go to the stereotype of, well, he's in business for money, and so he'll do things that you want him to do, but it's going to cost. Yeah. Have the motivation for your NPC.
I'll throw one out, and it might, I think it's going to piggyback on something that you're going to say. So hopefully this won't get yours too badly out of order.
Okay. Nope.
But it's actually kind of the same. My first tip is to make characters recurring, and we've kind of already talked about it, so we can kind of jump through this. But when I first started homebrewing, I kind of jumped in before I knew what I was doing, to be honest. I railroaded you guys. I remember Chris Metz sort of laughing about how he wanted to go down a certain street, and I just said, well, there's nothing there.
I went into a tavern,
yes,
and was like questioning the barkeep, and you're like, the beer is really bad. And I'm like, I don't care. I need to get some information. You did everything you could to get me out of there.
And I did not realize at the time, and you guys were very gracious as far as allowing me to do that. But anyway, as I set up the entire story arc, you guys were bouncing around an entire continent, which made it really difficult to have recurring characters. And that's, I'm not sure I lucked out in that one of your first bad guys you guys came up against was a Cambion, and
yes,
they can I forget if it's not Dimension Door, but they can basically they can teleport, get themselves out of situations easily. So you defeated him but didn't kill him. He was able to escape, and that was just one of those lucky coincidences where, as we went forward, I remembered him and thought, oh, he could come back, and it would make sense within the world, and so that became fun to make that recurring character, and he became more of a frenemy by the end.
Yes.
And that was so useful to be able to build that in. But again, recurring characters, I think in cities that's a real good argument for having at least part of your campaign be in a place where characters return to again and again.
Yeah, I mean, because in the city you keep going back to them, and that was, so this one is very similar to one of mine. I said allow characters to return when it's appropriate. You don't want to railroad it where a character just keeps showing up and being like, go that way. I guess you could, and maybe that would not make it feel quite as railroady if your NPC does that. And so I don't know, maybe that's not such a bad idea. But yes, in the city, it's much easier to have recurring characters, or NPCs rather. And I really like the way in which you do that, because you don't do. We've been to cities and villages, but really it's part of the travels of our games, and so you've done a nice job of bringing NPCs in that then show up a long time later in some cases. Like we were talking before the show, Alathion, is that his name? Mm-hmm. He was very early in our campaign, and he wanted to. We ran into him in the wilderness, and he wanted to give us things, but Borum was so obstinate and sure that this was something bad that he kind of drove him off. But then Alathion showed up months later, and there to help us. And we're like, oh my gosh, this guy was, and then Borm felt pretty bad about it. But, and Artaxis is another good one that is a repeater and has changed over the years. And so, or over time. I think, bringing characters back is fun for the characters. It helps make connections in the adventure sometimes, especially if it's a fun or scary or threatening or even helpful NPC. It's fun when the players recognize who it is, and then either the dread comes over their face. Like sometimes when we saw Artaxis early on, we're like, oh my gosh, this guy again. He's going to kill us. Or, someone that's kind of fun like Joblob in Waterdeep. I tried to make him sort of a mysterious yet kind of goofy sort of character so that you'd want to return to him from time to time. But again, those connections, I think, are what really help with those recurring characters. So that was my second one.
Okay. So my second one is another tip to make a memorable NPC is to make one that's competitive with the group.
Ooh. Yeah.
And, trying to reach the same goal. I know this has been done in Critical Role. The example that comes to mind for me, since I'm sort of a Drakkenheim fan, if you've seen that, there is one of the lead characters is a fighter from a nearby kingdom called Caspia.
Yes.
And Pluto Jackson. And he has a competitor, Jupiter Jones, that is also in Drakkenheim for various, to achieve glory and that sort of thing. And the way he's introduced is he's a little bit better than Pluto.
Yes.
And so when they first meet him, they almost get into a fight with him. And then they decide to get into a competition instead, taking turns fighting a troll. And
that's right.
So again, combining that with the recurring, there's that competitive edge that just heightens the emotional investment in the story. So I think that's a very useful trick for an NPC.
I like that example, and I like this point because it also kind of gives you a sense of urgency from the player's standpoint that someone is trying to achieve the same thing you are, and so no goofing around.
Right.
Let's keep it moving, and it makes each decision you make seem to have a little bit more weight because is this what the other player, is this what the NPC is going to be doing as well, or are you trying to outsmart them? So yeah, it definitely adds a new layer to the game if you know there's an NPC that's trying to achieve the same thing you are. It's very kind of Indiana Jones-ish, because he always has someone that he knows is going after, and I'm sure it's a common trope. It's just Indiana Jones is what came to mind, where someone else is trying to, I guess 007 sometimes has that element as well. Super cool. I like that one. I did not have anything like that on my list, so I appreciate that. So I'm going to go with, for my third item is, I think it's generally, maybe not always, but it's generally good to make sure your NPCs have big personalities. So that they're recognizable, but also so they're interesting. I think it's what helps the players become involved and invested. It creates fun encounters. And so I think about, so I go back to Waterdeep because that's the game that I mainly have been playing, or DMing rather. And I go back to the villain that you guys encountered coming back from Saltmarsh. Really two villains. They were working together, Ashen Malor and Dagger Dawn. And so even as villains, they still have big personalities. One of them's a little bit more evil. The other one is more like tough guy, but then, which you guys kind of brought along to even work with you a little bit. But I think, so when Ashen Malor shows up in the alley and she's just like, big, you guys knew exactly what was going to happen, or at least what her goal was. And so I think those big personalities become, again, relatable to the players, can be fun because if it's a fun one like Joblob, that big personality is why you want to go visit that character.
Right. It strikes me, again, tangent here, sorry, but you think about that, the big personality thing for an NPC, I think you see that in sitcoms.
Oh, yeah.
Where you think of the side character that you can't wait for them to show up because they're going to do something just outlandish and funny.
Right. Yeah, and again, why is that a popular trope in stories and sitcoms? Because it engages the audience. In this case, the audience is the players. We have an active creature in the
the
dungeon this
have
morning.
made it into our haven't started onto our chamber. They haven't started chewing on us yet, but
yeah, I think we're gonna get a little keyboard work over here. So anyway, big personalities. I think that's good. A good tip for creating a memorable NPC.
So mine is related. My third one is quirkiness. Just give one quirk to the character. You don't have to do more than one because, again, you've got to keep all these straight. But I think that, again, can make it very memorable. And this is where, as I was developing this list, I thought, I know I've heard this in other D&D lists of suggestions, where go to literature, go to movies, find a character that you like, and you can lift those things. And so this quirkiness, I can remember all the way back, even if it's just a funny laugh. When we were doing the kids' adventure years ago, and I think there was a session where it might have just been your girls were the only ones there.
Okay.
And you came across a shop owner, and I kind of panicked because I didn't know what to do to make that memorable. So I just decided, I just made her nervous with a funny laugh after every sentence. Yeah. And, things like that I think can be effective. You can look into literature for these things. Our rattlings are starting to chew on our flesh. This is bad. So anyway, again, this is a whole new level of nerddom for me. But if you are a fan of Jane Austen, she is the master of a one-note side character that just adds so much amusement to her stuff. Pride and Prejudice, you're focused on the lead romantic characters and all that, but Elizabeth Bennet has a sister named Mary who fancies herself an intellectual, and everything she says is so vacuous that you just can't wait for the next thing she says because it's so just eye-rollingly bad. And she's got characters like that scattered through every single novel that she writes. The other one that jumped into my mind as far as an example of a really quirky character that's fun is Edna from The Incredibles. And she's again, I think she's like the perfect example of a great NPC because you get the feeling she's hyper competent, probably knows more and is more powerful in some ways than the lead characters, but she's just so out there and quirky in her worldview that she's just fun to listen to whenever she comes on the basically onto the screen. So yes, pick one quirky thing and just run with it. I think that can make an NPC memorable.
Yeah, I'm sitting here scrolling on my Google machine trying to find the name of this character, but if you are a fan of the Loki series, season 2 has just recently come out, and there is an NPC that they have encountered, at least that's how I'd put it if this were an adventure. It's a guy who he's a technician who works and repairs things, and he just has this, he's taken over the show, really kind of he's so big and just quirky, and he knows things. Oribus is the name of is the name of that character. Yeah, in fact, here I'm just reading off of, it says, described as the quirky repair guy, Wright explained that every piece of technology that the TVA was either designed by OB or that he knows how to fix it and keep it operational. And so he's really kind of integral to the story, but a minor, generally would be seen as a minor character, but they've made this character so big. And so that actually kind of goes into my next one. And so my fourth one that fits along with Oribus from Loki is they should have something that the players want or need. It could be information. It could be influence to help them get something. It could be something that NPC is there to help them, whether it's in combat or I don't know what other kind of help there is. Maybe this NPC has equipment or can fix something like Oribus from Loki. Otherwise, it's kind of like, why is this NPC here? It could be even be, when I say what they want or need, it could be something that is in contrast to what they want, like you were saying with competition. And so there needs to be some purpose as to why the NPC needs to be there. Again, that makes the connection for the players.
My fourth one actually is pretty much on point with that as well. I put generous and supportive. And I think the theme that comes along is anything you can do to create an emotional attachment to the NPC is going to make the game more memorable and more fun for the players. And, what better way? Well, there is one, I think there is one better, so that's going to be my last one. But up until that one, what better than to make a character that's generous and supportive of the party? And, this can be a tavern keep that intervenes and stops other NPCs from talking trash about them, or, happens to compliment them and be very encouraging. Again, examples of this that sprang to mind from pop culture is Phil Coulson from the Avengers.
Yes.
Just
great
always
example
there. And they do such a good job with him if you follow the arc of the first couple phases, because honestly, when he first appears, you kind of think he's a bad guy. And then slowly you realize what he really is and how helpful he is.
Right.
And another, this is, from literature, and it's a little bit of a digression, but it's such a cool character. I want to share it because it might spark some ideas in DMs. David Copperfield, there is a character in there, his Aunt Betsy, who is just an amazing character. The story of David Copperfield very quickly is I think his father died before he was born. His mother remarries, and the man is somewhat cold. And then the mother dies, and the man turns out to be just horrific and just cruel, sends David Copperfield to a workhouse and treats him terrible. And the boy finally decides to run away, and the only relative he has is Aunt Betsy, but from what he's heard, she's almost as bad as this stepfather. But he takes a chance, he goes to her, and she's this very upright, stern-faced older woman that just looks amazingly frightening, and she's very sharp with him, very abrupt. And when he gets to her, she's like, "You're a runaway," and she like grabs him and kind of holds him at her house. And then she gets word that the stepdad is coming to take him back. And the way that it's set up is, as a reader, you're actually somewhat convinced she'll let him do that. And the stepdad comes in and tells her all the bad things about David Copperfield, and he gets to hear it. His heart drops, the reader's heart drops, and then Aunt Betsy just turns it and just tears into the stepdad. Just says how awful he is and what a horrible person he is and how dare he. And the stepdad actually has his sister with him, and she is trying to get in on this and attack Aunt Betsy. And Aunt Betsy won't even listen to her, just ignores her absolutely. And you're just cheering as a reader that this character that you thought might be bad turns out to be a protector.
Nice.
So I think if there's a way to do that in a game, particularly with low-level characters, that can be an emotional hook that will keep them there.
That's super cool. This is why at the opening of the show I said, I think I'm just going to sit back and listen to your list because I love these examples that you're pulling out. And I actually have a desire now to read David Copperfield.
Honestly,
that sounds really cool.
Honestly, as I say, Dickens books are usually way too long for me and too depressing, but that one's actually a pretty good one.
Sounds good. Let's see. I'm thinking you still have one left, right?
I do.
Let me go ahead and let you do that one next, and then I'll finish up because I have a very generalized conclusion to my list.
Okay. So the final way that I think you can make a memorable NPC, and again, I'm thinking in terms of just putting the emotional hooks in, is tragic.
Oh. Explain.
Now this is
cool.
Again. Now this is, you have to be careful with this one because if it's too tragic and they're killed off, then that's it. But it can be the memory of them. Maybe they're someone that starts out as a powerful friend or whatever, but as the characters advance in level and become powerful as well, and they return, maybe that character has been victimized by the big bad guy. There could even be death. The example that popped into my mind was, again, from Dungeons and Drakenheim. This is near the end of their first season. I don't want to give spoilers.
It's okay. It's been out a long time.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay.
It's my fault that I haven't finished it yet, so go right ahead.
So Jupiter Jones, who I mentioned earlier, he starts out as a competitor, but by the end, they have kind of grown past him, and he becomes an ally. And he goes with them into the final boss fight. And he wades in against this monster and literally gets ripped apart.
Oh, wow.
And as a listener, I was like, oh, no.
Yeah.
No, we just started liking him. So that can be very powerful, again, to your players. But again, that was kind of final. But there are interesting arcs that you can do with tragic.
You just gave me an idea. So, okay, we're gonna carry with that. But yeah, and I'm thinking that, if it is a situation like that with Jupiter Jones, it could potentially, and again, not having finished yet, it could be a rallying cry or give the players some special motivation that they might not have had before, if it is the death or the entrapment or the capture of an NPC, whether loved or not. Maybe it's like, oh, they were kind of bad, but they don't deserve that. Maybe there's something worse than that NPC.
Oh, and speaking of, sorry to interrupt, but when I ran my daughter's group through the Telesaria one, Artaxis actually does die. Fighting on their side.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Oh, that's cool.
He gets just obliterated by the Dragloth.
He was getting beat up with us in the Dragloth, but we managed to not let that happen, or I don't remember exactly what happened, but yes. Because we put him up against the Dragloth too. Yeah. Or we allowed him to, yeah.
And my daughter said later that the whole table just went silent and in shock. That happened. So that can be effective too.
That is cool. So I don't know. As we've been going through this, it sounds like the best way to build a memorable NPC is to spend hours making it. and having to know ahead of time, okay, they might go here, how am I gonna, a lot of this happens on the fly.
Yes.
Or the way I've handled it, and maybe it's not the right way. I don't know if there's a right or wrong way, but a lot of times you guys in Waterdeep will encounter somebody, and on the fly, I create some sort of personality, or I create this or that, and then it's in the time after that play that I'm like, okay, they've established this person as someone who's going to, like, when I had no idea you guys were going to befriend everybody in the alley. That was not anticipated. So after you had kind of gone around and met all your neighbors, I was like, okay, so they're going to do this. I had to go and create personalities and, motivations for all of the people in there. So sometimes the development of building a memorable NPC happens after the session, after you discover that the players have made some sort of connection with them.
You did that. Yeah, you did that. And again, or maybe you definitely allowed it to happen, but I could see how it was the interplay between players and you, because there was a character. Yes, one of those neighbors was supposed to be a foil. They were supposed to be a bad guy. And
Darn it, you guys.
We were able to get him over to our side, and then he got killed by the big bad.
Yep.
And that was a very strong emotional reaction, I know, for me as a player, because I was thinking, no, wait, he's turned over a new leaf. He's going to, and you've taken away his possibility of redemption. And so that created just, for my character, such a strong motivation of vengeance on the bad guy.
And that's where because there were the bad guy was Ashen Malor, and that's where she kind of became the top. You guys have been most concerned about Dagger Dawn for so long that when that happened, Ashen Malor kind of became enemy number one. And just so you know, that's what you get for not letting him be the foil. Just killed him off. No, that's not actually how that happened. It was by circumstances and the way in which the game went, but it worked out really well. I wanted to put that out there, that do not try to anticipate and build NPCs on what you are expecting to be minor characters. That comes in my experience, that comes after you discover who they want to make connections with. Some of your main characters, go ahead and do that. So how do you go about, we've talked a lot about the personality and the role play of these characters, but what about, how do I make the character? And so I just wanted to point out as my number 5 is that there's all sorts of literature out there. And I don't mean the kind of literature you're talking about. I think the literature you're talking about for inspiration as to who and how and why are great. But I'm talking about like feet on the ground DM. How many hit points did this person have? I didn't know how many hit points the barkeep Froon had. So I had to use something to create that. And so my number 5 is to use the books. And the DM's guide has a section on creating NPCs that goes into depth. So when you have someone you're going to put some weight into, you can use those charts and things. They even have ideas for motivations and all that sort of thing.
Right.
If you need something really quick, and this is where I went for Froon, who is the barkeep, in the Dungeon Master's Guide, Appendix B is where they have stat blocks for several common people.
Okay.
A knight, a nobleman, that kind of stuff. And you might, in all of these, you make adjustments based on what you need and what you want, but they're good starting places. There's also several supplemental NPC books and generators. You want to modify probably those to fit what you need, but I found a few that work really well. One is a book titled The Game Master's Book of Non-Player Characters by Jeff Ashworth. Interestingly, I picked this up at Michael's. But I think if you go on Amazon and you just put in, I think if you just start with The Game Master's Book of, there are several in the series, but there's one on NPCs, and there are more NPCs in that book. It can be overwhelming, so don't get too deep into the weeds on it. Use the table of contents and sort of work your way that way. But then also, don't forget that pre-published adventures are loaded with NPCs. That's where Joblob came from, and a few other people that you've encountered. All the people in the street that you've mentioned, or that you guys went and met in the alley, they are in that adventure book, the Dragon of Waterdeep, or I forget what the book is called now. But so, you can go to pre-made adventures for inspiration. There's also, as I said, third-party books, like our friend Andrew K. Wood has a whole series of books on monsters from the dungeon, monsters of the Feywild, monsters of the city. Now, again, most of those are monsters, but he has a lot of NPC-like characters in there that you can build off of.
Our other friends, Limitless 5e,
yes,
I just bought a book of NPCs from them.
Nice.
And they've got, I think, at least 2 volumes, possibly more. So that's another good source.
So if you want to invent the wheel from scratch because it's a special NPC, by all means, go to the Dungeon Master's Guide or just do it yourself. But if you're trying to work on 7 or 8 people that the party just met in this last adventure, go to those books. They will save you a ton of time and probably give you some inspiration as to how to develop these characters a little bit deeper, because they do give ideas for that kind of thing too. Cool.
Good list.
I like both. I like your angle on bringing some fictional characters in from literature or movies to use as inspiration. I think the books
are practical advice from you.
Are nice. For that as well. So if you are building some NPCs and you come up with a interesting way of developing them, or you have a way of developing them prior to the game, like maybe you have some just ideas set aside in case the characters come across somebody, you can just draw from a deck. That would be cool too. We'd love to hear about those ideas that you have in making NPCs, memorable NPCs at that. So reach out to us on social media. So with that, hey, until next week, let those NPCs roll those 20s for you. Talk to you next week.